When you think of dangerous jobs, what sort of positions spring to mind? Perhaps they are jobs working up high, or working underwater, or working with molten metals or toxic substances. I doubt most people would consider museum work to be dangerous, but it's true. As museum professionals, our job is to look after the things that human beings leave behind, and human beings leave behind some pretty weird and dangerous stuff. And as a result, working with a museum collection can actually be quite dangerous if you're unaware of the hazards and aren't looking after yourself properly. Some museums specialize in the more dangerous aspects of humanity. There are museums of medicine, warfare, conflict, and disease, and they often have items in their collections that require extra care and extra caution when either handling or displaying these items. Collections around the world contain toxic preservative chemicals, poison-tipped weapons, radioactive dusts, firearms, and explosive materials, but it can sometimes be the most innocuous everyday items that we need to be extra careful around, simply because we don't expect them to be dangerous. I know there are a few people who watch this channel who are really interested in historical clothing and vintage clothing, and I want you all to just keep in mind and be careful when purchasing older clothing items and garments that sometimes the most dangerous items on display in a museum collection are the clothes. I do have a video coming out fairly soon that will kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive on the deadly history of the fashion industry. That'll be coming out hopefully in the next month or so, so please make sure that you're subscribed and that you have hit the bell for notifications for this channel. But to cover this briefly, people of the past have used toxic substances to pigment and color their clothing, and they have also used poisonous substances to manufacture certain garments and textiles, poisoning entire factories of workers in the process. An era of time where it seemed that toxins were being folded into aspects of everyday life, including clothing, was during the 19th and early 20th centuries. I feel it's no secret that the Victorians had some wild stuff in their everyday products, but in case you weren't aware, they had arsenic in their wallpaper, their clothing, they had it on their fancy stoles and furs, and were even using it to preserve hunting trophies. And arsenic wasn't the only suspect in this toxic era of manufacturing. Mercury was used in hat making, lead was in the paint, and both lead and mercury were being sprayed onto plants and fruit trees in an attempt to keep the bugs away. I am very familiar with the dangers of a Victorian artifact collection because that is a part of my job. I work with a Victorian collection in my day-to-day life. In order to protect myself, I always make sure that I am wearing nitrile gloves. And in the cases where wearing gloves is not necessarily appropriate or best practice for handling a specific artifact, and I have to use my bare hands, I always make sure that I vigorously wash them after handling said artifact. Additionally, if I'm handling anything that may have possibly had an arsenic dust or other kind of airborne toxin that I might accidentally ingest, I always make sure that I'm wearing a mask. And then this way I don't accidentally ingest poison. I have often described working with items from this collection as like handling a live venomous snake, but it's honestly treated me pretty well so far, and I know, as far as I know, I haven't ingested anything that I shouldn't have, but who knows, maybe in a few years I will keel over from something weird and museum based. But in the meantime, I'm doing everything I can to protect myself. For the first time ever, we actually have a sponsor for this channel. Carr Mclean is a family-owned Canadian company that sources and supplies a wide variety of products to archives, museums, schools, and libraries. I order from them several times a year through my day job at a Heritage House museum, but they also have a number of handy materials for the family historian who wants to preserve photo albums or heirlooms, not to mention acid-free storage boxes for vintage clothing and antiques, and also a wide variety of personal protective gear to keep us all safe when handling the strange and sometimes dangerous items that our ancestors leave behind. If you are someone who wants to protect some fragile objects in your collection, check out the link in the description to make your first order. There are some items that when they first come into a museum collection, they are completely stable, everything's fine, but as they begin to degrade, they may off-gas or even combust depending on their composition. This is the case with certain film negatives, particularly cellulose nitrate negatives. According to the Canadian Conservation Institute, ignition of this type of film generally occurs when you have a lot of this type of film stored in one area. In the collection that I work with, we actually have like hundreds of film negatives, and to be honest with you, I'm actually not sure if they're cellulose nitrate or cellulose acetate, which is a more stable type of film negative. Most of the negatives were created between 1920 and 1950, which is when the combustible cellulose nitrate negatives were kind of being phased out of the market and being replaced with the more stable version. But with that being said, I still generally treat them all as if they're combustible, and then that way I can make sure that, you know, nothing is going to go up in flames and everything is going to be okay. I have rehoused about 50% of them so far into individual mylar sleeves so that they can be handled and examined without having to get our hands on the negative itself. And then I've slipped these into some glassine envelopes, which I have labeled with the accession number. In an ideal world, my museum would have an objects conservator who would be able to take a look at these negatives and confirm if they are cellulose acetate or cellulose nitrate, but here in reality, I am the only collections person who works at my museum, so I'm trying my best, is basically what it shakes out to be. But if you are someone who is not currently working in a museum but wants to be working with a museum collection, I highly recommend that you acquire a first aid certificate, and surprisingly, I also recommend that you get your firearms license. Understanding how firearms work not only help curators and collection managers understand how they work to not only enhance our understanding of the items and their context within the past, but it also helps them from accidentally misfiring or discharging in a way that could possibly hurt you or someone else. There are a number of other dangerous items that I have personally worked with over the years. A really interesting one that I worked with was actually a doctor's chest, which at first doesn't seem like it would be very dangerous. And within that doctor's chest, they had a number of different things. Back in those days, they were still using like mercury pills for treating things like syphilis. And so a lot of these little bottles and vials that were in this chest had cracked, or, you know, there were things that were off-gassing that, you know, if you're a visitor and you're walking past this, you shouldn't be breathing in. So we were just making sure that everything was safe for the public as well as for us. When handling this doctor's chest and rehousing the items within it, we had to have a full respirator on, and we were also wearing nitrile gloves as well as a full bodysuit just to be safe. The ship that the doctor's chest was on, the last voyage that that chest took, incidentally had an outbreak of typhus, and I don't know if typhus sticks around on objects for a long time, and I wasn't really interested in finding out. Another seemingly innocuous item that I've handled in the past was actually a World War I air raid siren. When I was a conservation intern, I came in one day and this thing was on the desk, and supposedly one of the conservators had accidentally set it off. And to have an air raid siren go off in your tiny objects conservation lab, I guess it was not welcome amongst other residents of the building in their various offices. So I'm really glad that I missed that and that I was warned to not pull that lever. I feel like I could keep going on and talking about lots of different items in museum collections that are super dangerous, but I feel like I'd be here all day, and I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about the dangers of museum work and how we as museum professionals and collections managers and curators work to protect ourselves and the general public. Museum work is very rewarding, and it's just also important to keep in mind that it can be dangerous and that we need to look after ourselves. I hope that you enjoyed this kind of behind the scenes discussion. I hope that you have a lovely day/afternoon. It is currently snowing here, apparently, and I will see you next time. Family haunt. Cat. Can you please stop? Remove you.